Hello, my name is Sang-Hee. I'm from Hanmaum Church in Chuncheon. I haven't had many ups and downs or hardships in my life, as many others who have given testimonies have had. If anything is particular about my life, it's merely that I'm the fourth child of my parents who have had a pastoral ministry for 40 years. And wholly by the choice of my parents, not my own, I thought it was my destiny to live bound to the church for the rest of my life. I lived with closer ties to the church than anyone, so I was in a place where I could enjoy the power and privileges of the gospel better than anyone else. And yet, as they say, the darkest spot is right under the lamp. I lived with darker problems than the unbelievers of this world. But God came all the way to my dark corner under the lamp and shined His light of life upon me. I would like to tell you about His amazing grace. My parents had a pastoral ministry in the province of Gangwon. They served a rural area, but my father's church was fairly big, so there were always lots of events happening, like weddings and funerals. I've switched churches 4 times as I followed my parents in where they served. I spent the longest time at the third church, from 4th grade to my freshman year in college. My church friends went to my school and lived in my neighborhood. Among them was the son of a church elder. One day, I think I was in 5th grade at the time, this boy said to me while we were playing with friends, "Your family lives off of the money we pay the church. If we tell your family to leave, you have to leave." At the time, these words hurt me, not because I was young, but because I didn't really know what a church or the gospel was. I'm rather introverted and timid by nature, so I constantly heard things like this. I got more and more stressed, and my thoughts and actions became rough and harsh. When I was about 17, I got so incredibly angry, I don't even remember why, that I refused to take a major exam at school and just came home. Then I ripped up everything in the living room, the sofa, the shoes at the doorway, everything in my sight, with a pair of scissors. My family was so shocked by what I had done because I had never expressed my feelings before. Later, I was told that they even had a serious discussion about sending me to a psychiatric hospital. But what's more dangerous than outwardly expressed actions is your heart becoming so hardened that you can't trust anyone, and you become someone who can't talk about yourself with anyone else. In other words, you can't communicate with anyone anymore. That's what's really dangerous, because if you can't even trust the people you see, it becomes even harder to trust a God whom you can't see. I think that my father was respected and recognized as a pastor by the church and the denomination. From what I could see, he had a very stable ministry. Up until college, my life in the church was also pretty stable. Giving tithes and serving in the church were regular activities for me. But shortly after I graduated from college, my father's church fell into a conflict regarding its building construction issues. Shocking things happened at our church, things you wouldn't even see happening out in the world. These things were very difficult for me to deal with. As I experienced these hardships, the first thing that came to my mind was, does God really exist? If God really exists, why does He just stand by and let these awful things happen for such a long time? As thoughts like these came to mind, my blame became focused on God. And as these difficult times lasted longer than I thought they would, I became an atheist and an anti-Christian. You know that children's story about the emperor with no clothes? There's a scene where people line up to blindly follow a naked king. I thought, what if this is a congregation of people who are blindly following a non-existent God? Was there ever a believable truth or justice within the place called church in the first place? From my view, those things could not be seen, so I stopped going to church. For me, stopping church attendance was not a trivial matter. It was a radical, life-altering decision. Throughout life, I had never excluded God from my thoughts. I had never excluded the church from my thoughts. I had never excluded faith from my thoughts either. When I abandoned all of these in my heart, it was as if the support beams were pulled out from underneath the house. I felt my life completely collapse. I thought, I have to fill my heart with something, anything. At that point, I was already finishing up graduate school. I decided to pursue a second graduate degree. While working as a part-time middle school teacher, I prepared to enter graduate school a second time. Then one day, I received word that all the family should gather at my great-uncle's house where my grandmother lived because she was about to pass away. When I arrived in my grandmother's bedroom, it was right before her death. She was in pain, saying that it felt like something was slicing her with a knife from her throat all the way down to the pit of her stomach. She had been given a shot of morphine that cancer patients get, but it was not having any effect. My grandmother had served in the pastoral ministry with my grandfather, and she had been a lady full of prayer with many spiritual gifts, such as the gift of healing. My grandfather had been the pastor, but my grandmother had led the revivals. But now, the same lady who had healed so many people with her prayers was suffering at her own death because of a physical pain she couldn't control. How could this be? I was momentarily thrown into confusion. But what really amazed me was what happened right after her death. Because my grandmother had lived in a rural town, her skin was dark with sun exposure, and being 91 years old, she had a lot of age spots. But the moment she drew her last breath, her face began to light up as if it was lit with the sun, starting from her forehead and all the way down. Her skin changed color to reflect a natural Asian tone, then her face, which had been scrunched up with her sickness, smoothed out. Her mouth had been caved in because she had taken her false teeth out, but now it rose back up, and her face looked completely balanced. Her face looked so peaceful, and I don't even know when, but her age spots had disappeared. It was such an astonishing transformation that I asked myself, how do I accept what my eyes are seeing? One thing I learned while watching my grandmother change was that when you die, someone comes to you. My grandmother had seen something good. Just how good was the thing that she saw, that even the face of her soon-to-rot corpse had turned so peaceful? And since I lived in the exact opposite way of my grandmother's, it was obvious that the last place I'd end up would be the exact opposite of where she ended up. That was when the terror of hell descended upon my heart, and I was so afraid. At my grandmother's funeral, I watched the attendees with great interest. There are a lot of pastors in my family, so if someone calls out, "Pastor," about 10 people turn their heads. So the people serving or visiting at the funeral were all from churches. But there were some people whose faces were unusually happy during the funeral for the dead. People whose faces were filled with some kind of an assurance. These people had one thing in common. They were Hanmaum church members. They said things like, "Your grandmother is meeting your grandfather right now, isn't that wonderful? They're gonna be like newlyweds again. She's gonna see your aunt too." Well, things like that. As I heard such things, I thought, if someone can send me to heaven, whoever it may be, I want to believe in him. And another thing occurred to me as I gazed at those joyful faces. You see, the reason I had such negative thoughts about God wasn't because I'd been directly hurt by God in some way, but because churchgoers, the people who claimed to believe in him, had hurt me. I thought that if God really did exist, he might feel bad because he had been unjustly blamed. When I used to be a school teacher, sometimes the vice commissioner or the principal would visit my classroom and ask the students, "What are you learning right now?" Or, "What did your teacher just teach you?" Then, of course, I'd want a smart and competent student to answer those questions, right? But they would always end up asking the children who were poor students. Then, of course, the student would say something completely off topic, and the vice commissioner and the principal would look at me with doubt-filled eyes, which said, "You taught them that?" I would feel very wrongly accused under their glares. Then I would think to myself, you should have just asked me about the lesson. I thought, what if I'm putting God in that position? If God really does exist, I should directly ask him my questions and listen to his answers to determine whether I liked him or not. But instead, I asked other people these questions, and then I got dejected because of them. This seems kind of strange, doesn't it? What if those people were God's mentally challenged children? Well, I'm also one of those mentally challenged kids, lost and wandering around like this. What are we all doing, us mentally challenged children? These were my thoughts. Then I thought, I should try to meet him myself. After my grandmother's funeral, I happened to visit the pharmacy my older sister ran. My brother-in-law had been serving the college ministry at Hanmaum Church. And on that day, my sister asked me, out of the blue, "Do you want to try visiting Hanmaum Church?" At the time, I was someone who had such a venomously hostile air about me that no one could dare to venture to talk to me about faith and the church. But for some reason, that day, my sister was bravely talking to me about coming to church. Inside, I was really glad she asked. So I said, sure, whatever. And the very next day, I followed her to Hanmaum Church. It was dawn on a Thursday at the end of November. I hadn't even bothered going to Sunday worship service for a while. However, I didn't miss a day of dawn worship service on those bitterly cold winter mornings. That was because of my fear of hell. Every morning, what woke me wasn't the alarm clock. It was the face of my grandmother. As her face lingered before my eyes, I felt like I was creeping closer and closer, day by day, to hell, and I couldn't stay lying down. When I went to church, there was a blackboard on stage, and the pastor drew 2 circles on it. Here's heaven. Here's the world we live in. He drew only 2, and then a bit later he drew 1 more, hell, where I would end up. My focus was all about how am I going to get into that heaven there? How can I evade that terrifying hell? That was where all of my attention was, and I thought, well, there's that old saying, sincerity moves heaven, so let's try to pray hard, diligently read the Bible, listen well to the pastor's sermons, and not miss a day of dawn prayer with a heart full of sacrifice. Then I'll make at least some kind of progress towards heaven, right? So I diligently did all of those things. Then one day, my younger sister asked me a question. It was a question that utterly pierced me. She asked, "Can you really believe that there's a living God?" If she had asked, "Can you believe that there's a living God?" I would have said yes, but she asked if I could really believe it. I couldn't think of a thing to say in reply. Well, that's why I'm praying about it. That's how I answered her, and my own reply astonished me, because I had seen the true state of my faith. I'd been a Christian since birth, a pastor's daughter, but my faith had no basis. I couldn't even be certain that God was living. If God wasn't even living, who was I giving all of my time, effort, and sacrifice to? There was no greater paradox in life than this. From that point on, my prayers to God became very earnest, really honest, and frank. I prayed to God like this: God, I don't know whether you really exist or not. When I look at all the things of the world, it looks like a creator exists. But why does the name of the creator have to be God? The reason I call you God is because I have been taught since I was a child to call you that. If you really do exist, please let me know. And please let me go to heaven after I die. Please don't let me die at least until after I've met Jesus. I can only be thankful for God's grace that He listened to such a shabby prayer. You see, my thoughts are complex and relative. I thought that since I was born into a Christian family and I've been taught to call the Creator God, I call Him God. But those who were born into a Buddhist family would call the Creator Buddha, so it was obvious that they called Him by that name, right? That was how I used to think. There's a sentence you hear often at church. It's, "I hope you have faith." Hearing that frustrated me so much because I thought that if they told me to have faith while giving me some kind of an objective proof to believe in, faith would develop in my heart even if no one told me to believe. But instead of hard proof, they relied on the assurance in their own hearts in order to demand faith from others. So weren't they just trying to demand others to accept their own thoughts? Some time passed and I attended Hanmaum Church's college and single adults retreat. On the first day of worship, the pastor wrote on the chalkboard in big letters, "The resurrection is the gospel." I thought, the resurrection is the gospel? The resurrection isn't the only thing in the gospel. There's much more to the gospel than that. Then the pastor asked, when Jesus died on the cross, there were 3 men hung up on crosses up there on Calvary. Which one was God? The one in the middle. Then he asked, mix these 3 crosses up. Now, which one was God? The one in the middle? I couldn't tell. As it turns out, God didn't necessarily have to be the one in the middle, but the one who rose from the dead. In other words, if he had just died on the cross and ended there, nobody would know that he was God. After seeing his resurrection, I realized that the cross upon which he had died was the cross upon which God had died. That was why the cross upon which God had died was love. The crosses upon which the robbers had died couldn't be love, right? This was how I found solid proof, the objective proof I had been searching for that could let me believe in God. Not a subjective God of each person, but a God who exists no matter what my religion or ideology may be, and regardless of what I may have learned since childhood. There was proof that the very God mentioned in the Bible exists, and that solid proof was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Amen. As the pastor talked about John 2:22, he fervently stated that even Jesus' disciples believed in him as God only after they had seen his resurrection, and thus they came to believe in all the things in the Bible. Previously, though I had attended church, I had not been able to evangelize. Why? Because I didn't have an objective proof that God existed. How could I tell others to have faith in a truth that wasn't even absolute? But Jesus' resurrection was historical fact. I just leapt with joy. At the time, I was running a flute academy, and one of our students was a child whose family had been Buddhist for 3 generations. I was 3rd generation Christian, he was 3rd generation Buddhist. We were parallel lines that could never intersect and bother each other. But one day I said to him, "Did you know that Jesus rose from the dead?" Then the child said to me, "I'm Buddhist. If you're Buddhist, does that mean Jesus didn't rise from the dead?" Then he said, "No, he still did." "So then the living God exists, right?" I said. Then he said, "Oh, yeah." An objective proof that anyone is able to believe, that was definitely the resurrection. The sure faith that I've been looking for. A faith that can't be shaken by any situation, not a faith with a shaky foundation which stands when things are okay but crumbles when things get rough, but a sure faith that does not shake under any circumstances, was developed through a sure proof, the resurrection. Amen. Among people I've met, there are those who lived lives full of ups and downs, then became completely surrendered and transformed at once. But there are also people like me who have been near the church but can't find the sure proof for faith, so have very lukewarm faith even if they don't want to, because their spiritual dilemma isn't resolved. I really want to tell them, God truly exists. Jesus' resurrection is the proof of that. Amen. Because he is my Lord, I can live today full of joy and life. Don't misunderstand him because of other people or circumstances, but actually go to him, meet him, ask him, and listen to him. He will give you an answer for sure. Amen. I believe that the one who rose from the dead and is living even now will meet all of you through these words just like he came to me and met me. Thank you.